Hope Sent a Quiver, written by OrionLady on AO3, read by Alextras. Chapter 17.
Daddy, my shoes are getting squished.
If the elfin fingers on Clint's nose didn't wake him up, this sentence sure did. Laura shifted. "Nathaniel?" she asked, still half asleep. "You okay?"
Got up for some milk.
Clint opened his eyes. Nate a mere handspan from his face. He wore his footy fire truck pyjamas tonight, the sleeve cuffs riding up when he reached out and again touched Clint's face.
Daddy?
Gotta wake up. Pete! Clint exploded into action, grabbing his phone to check the time. He cursed inside his head at having overslept. Pete had been outside on the porch for 3 hours now. What if he was hypothermic or sick? Visions of Pete, porcelain-skinned and unconscious, or worse, floated before Clint's eyes. Ice tumbled into his stomach. Laura's eyes opened too. He's inside, right? I couldn't get him to. We fought. Clint took Nate's hand once he shimmered on pants and slippers, hard as jackhammer. He quietly headed to their bedroom door. I'll get him some milk, Lo. You sure? Yeah, I'll take care of it. Go back to sleep. Nate leashed Clint along down the stairs after he shut the door.
No, Daddy. I already got myself some milk.
Now that Clint looked for it, a faint white moustache dotted Nate's upper lip. You did? How'd you get up to the cupboard for a glass?
Pushed a stool onto the counter and climbed on it.
Clint snorted. Of course you did. Remember how we talked about kitchen safety?
I was really careful, Dad, but then I saw my shoes getting squished.
Your shoes? Clint checked Nate's feet again. Still in the onesie. No shoes on top or even over slippers. Clint almost scolded him for being up at this ungodly hour, but Nate's little face was serious as a funeral. Clint held his peace and let the boy drag him down to the bottom step, then bank a hard right. Yeah, buddy. Maybe Nathaniel was sleepwalking to have led Clint here. None of his kids ever sleepwalked, to his knowledge, but there was a first for everything. These are your shoes, which should be in the foyer closet, I might add. Mama's always telling you that. Nate glanced up at Clint like he was an idiot.
Daddy, he's squishing them and himself.
Clint's heart missed 2 erratic beats. The hall closet had a folding/sliding style door, and it had been pushed aside halfway. Clint knew for a fact that it was closed when he went to bed. He crouched slowly, something reverent on his face and in his choked breath, the same motion people do when face to face with a skittish animal. Nate. Clint couldn't talk above that husky sound. He exhaled the boy's name. You okay to go back to sleep now? Can you tuck into bed on your own?
I'm a big boy, Dad. I can do it.
Awesome. Thanks for telling me about your shoes. Clint swallowed, wiped the milk moustache from Nate's face with his sleeve, and pecked his cheek. Good night, son. Sleep tight.
Night, Dad.
Nate 1-2'd his way up each step, already yawning. Perfect. Hopefully he and the rest of the house would sleep through this. Clint criss-cross folded his legs. The whole world balanced on a knife's edge inside his chest. He couldn't handle any more disappointment and purposeful distance. Not with this. Not for 1 more minute. Please, please. Clutter littered the closet too, so it took a few tries to slide the door all the way back around the sneakers and tennis rackets, and a wayward set of roller skates. When Clint did, he lost his ear in a rush. Out of the mouth of babes. There, curled up on Nate's light-up sneakers and against Clint's archery box, was Pete. He'd changed into the new black and red flannel pajama pants Clint bought him. One of Clint's black hoodies from the coat hangers above layered over the cable knit sweater, and fluffy socks. His curls had indeed hardened at some point, sweat dried and frozen almost solid. Tension outlined his frame, a border of anxiety Clint ached to see. Oh, Pete. Pete's eyes popped open a slit. Clint? Clint held his breath. let it out in a gradual release. He tried to sound normal and not like he was having kittens about Pete choosing to sleep inside. If Clint had locked the front door even once this past week, it didn't bear dwelling on. Yeah, Pete, it's me. That doesn't look very comfy. Pete shrugged. He rubbed at his eyes like a toddler, gradually waking up. Did it get too cold outside? You bunked in here? Mm-hmm. Pete's fingers twisted in the dark material. Sorry I yelled at you earlier. I don't like yelling at people, especially adults. You're 17, Pete. It's a feature, not a bug. Not that Cooper or Lila yelled very much, but when they did, it was much worse than what Pete could manage. The comparison was stark. Pete huffed with a watery sniff. His fingers stretched out a few inches, then chickened out and pulled back into his protective bubble. Somewhere inside Clint calmed at the aborted motion, a storm blown away even if Pete remained drenched from it. Pete might be a traumatized, PTSD-ridden teenager, emaciated to the point that Clint still debated calling an ambulance some days. But he was still a teenager, still a kid. An affectionate kid from what Clint could tell of Pete's default state beyond the barriers. If you can sleep on the floor in a coat closet, I think you can handle a real room. Clint held out his hand, not touching but within easy reach for Pete. His arm bridged the liminal threshold of this closet and the promise of a safe harbour that Pete wouldn't let himself moor in. Pete eyed Clint's palm with fear and longing. It's right across the hall from Laura and I. Plain twin bed, some of Natasha's old stuff on the dresser. How's that sound? Tears filled Pete's eyes. I shouldn't. I'm not supposed to. Why? Clint whispered back. It suddenly clicked that they weren't talking about beds anymore, that maybe his fear had nothing to do with being inside at all. Because the entire point of this was, it would have all been for nothing. Pete hiccuped. I'm being selfish. Clint firmed his own trembling lips. Pete, I'm not trying to replace anyone or be any kind of title in your life. I just see a kid who needs a place to lay his head and some food in his belly, and it wounds me deeply when I can't provide that because you won't accept it. A fat tear got lost in the hoodie collar. You're safer without me around. How, Pete? The most ragged, wet sack skidding across the crumble sound Clint had ever heard erupted from Pete's mouth. Because I get everyone around me killed. The confidence and steadiness in his voice revealed a glimpse of before Pete, from a time long preceding whatever disaster had struck his life. A different Pete, but also, in a way, the real Pete. They all died, Clint. Pete hid his face in his hands. They all died because they cared about me. You shouldn't care about me either. Clint's hand stretched closer, near Pete's face, right over the spot where the boot print bruise had been. Pete flinched. Clint's hand halted at once. The floor threatened to tumble out from beneath him, as if his very psyche hung on this one moment. He sensed that Pete's did too. It injected Clint with fresh courage, fresh initiative. Pete. No! Pete shriveled as close to the archery box as he could get, as far away from Clint as possible with him blocking the only exit. It's not right. I think it is, Clint whispered, and I think you're punishing yourself for all of it, even though not a single second of whatever happened is your fault. Clint stroked a knuckle over Pete's cheek, and this time he opened like a flower, arms away from his head enough for Clint to slide his own under Pete's armpits. He lifted the kid with far more ease than he should have been able to, and Pete went with it, grabbed at Clint even. Sobs assaulted his body in staccato gunfire sounds, bit back between his teeth because even incinerating from the inside out, Pete put other people first and didn't want to wake anybody. Come here, Pete. Don't fight it. Pete ended up in the hollow of Clint's legs so they were chest to chest, his calves on the floor around Clint's hips. Clint just held him, stabilizing the back of Pete's smushed curls against each wave of tears and hitched sobs. "I miss my aunt," Pete wailed into Clint's shirt. "I want to see her again." Clint closed his eyes. "Is that why you gave up on life, Pete? Wanted to die?" Pete nodded. "I want to go home." Clint's tears were silent compared to Pete's, but they seemed to burn his skin on the way down, the tear tracks hot long after they landed in Pete's hair. "I wish you could go back to your home too." Not a place. This was about a time, a state of being with certain people who were long gone. "That's why I shouldn't." Pete had to stop and catch his breath. Some gossamer thread holding his resolve to keep people at arm's length had snapped tonight, and that, plus a mixture of fatigue and grief, removed his filter too. "Shouldn't sleep here." "Shh." Clint bent to hush next to the boy's ear. "Slow that breathing down, Pete." Pete talked right over him. "Staying here, supposed to be temporary. Just enough to eat and sleep until..." "Until what?" Pete's fingers tightened, blindsided. "Until, well, until I'm strong enough to get back out there and help people. It's all I have left. Clint, it's what I'm supposed to do." "That's not a very human way to live. You can't go through life with no emotional connection to people." Pete sagged in his arms. "Not for lack of trying." Clint rocked them, more for his own sake than Pete's. The gaunt ribs pushed at his hands in another sob, and Clint felt the last of Pete's stone walls liquefy between his fingers. "That's it," he breathed. "I've got you, Pete. I'm keeping watch for once. You can let go. Let it out." Pete took him up on that, sobs ragged, though his high breaths alleviated after a few minutes. Clint planted a kiss on the tip of Pete's nose, then his crown, then down by his temple, and started the process all over again when a fresh round of tears wet his shirt. Morning tears. A cold little nose sniffled into the hollow of Clint's throat, right over his pulse, and Clint lifted his chin to welcome it. All of Pete's body weight rested against Clint, trusting the man in his arms not to drop him or let him tip one way or the other. This boy, this precious, stunted, self-deprecating boy. "Pete, do you know what your job is right now? The most important thing you can do?" Pete drew in a wet breath through his nose. "Yeah, I gotta stop the bad things from happening." "No, Pete," Clint crooned. He imprinted kiss after kiss in Pete's hair. "Your greatest achievement is to sleep in and thrive and hug people a lot and eat too many cookies and help us beat Laura at Taboo and catch Nate's chickens and sing along to Lila's weird K-pop songs. To be loved." Pete's gasping sobs took a referee's time out, completely paused. Clint leaned down by his ear again. "I love you, Pete, and I want you to be able to say the same thing of yourself one of these days. You are not a sacrificial lamb who exists just to be slaughtered." The filter over Clint's mouth was removed by choice, the words a brand on his tongue for weeks now. He declared it quiet and steadfast, like the stubborn curl over Pete's forehead. He loved the infectious way Pete laughed, the times he held Nathaniel's hand. He loved Pete's brain and fascination for learning new things and how technology worked. His clumsy signing hands, the teddy bear dimples in his cheeks. He loved Pete's sense of humour, his propensity for bantering with Clint and Laura in the most subtle ways. He loved how gentle Pete was with animals and all living things, really. How he stepped around the hole in the porch steps because a wild daisy had started to grow out of it. Clint didn't realize he'd said some of this out loud until Pete began to shake. A rocket juddering into orbit kind of shaking. The boy gasped into his shirt, sinews and marrow quavering under their own personal detonation. Pete didn't say the words back, but he rested his ear over Clint's heart and wrapped his arms around his neck. He felt like every other child Clint had the honour of holding in his lifetime. Just a child starving for love, even more than food. Clint thumbed his shoulder. You have no other responsibility than to learn to be a healthy, kind human being, Pete. Clint wouldn't be surprised if seismographs picked up the love pounding through his chest, the overwhelming cleanse of it through his veins. To love others and be loved in return. I don't. Pete's fingers tangled up in the regrown hairs at the back of Clint's neck. I don't know how to do that anymore. Will you let me help you remember? Another pause. The forest and the house and dervish stars held their breath along with Clint. Then Pete whined, deep, deep down in his throat, a primal instinct of his own. I don't want to fight anymore. Clint pressed his lips to Pete's forehead and left them there. That makes two of us. An abscess in Clint's heart, festering since he'd watched Tony's trophy float away across the lake, was purged of its infection at Pete's words and how he closed his eyes, depending on Clint to watch the room and hold him upright. Not just out of trust. You sleepy, bub? Exhausted. Pete slurred, his weight tilted even further into Clint's pecs. A curl tickled at the base of his throat. Tired of watching your own back? Uh-huh. A late-blooming tear welled underneath Pete's lid and wandered down his nose. I'm done. Clint broke into a shiny-cheeked grin for the first time all night. Not one of humour or even joy, but the grin of someone hearing faint music after months of total silence. 2 years in emotional isolation, and Clint's heart found a harmony. You would have loved this kid too, Tony. Gosh, I'd never have gotten rid of you if you had met him here. You'd probably kidnap him right from under my nose. Hold on, Pete. Peter ragdoll weight in his arms. Clint carefully stood. He only grunted a little at the weight, and would have preferred to struggle if it meant Pete weighed what he should. Pete jolted at the sudden weightless sensation. His legs tightened around Clint's waist. Clint? I've got you, Clint soothed. Won't let you fall, kid. Clint shifted to either foot in an effort to relax the quivery muscles in Pete's arms, tighter around Clint's neck. Pete's breaths undulated like he swallowed on repeat reflex, nauseous from the crying fit. It took another 2 minutes before he went boneless once more, and Clint didn't bunch an inch until he did. He'd never rushed what Pete needed. He wasn't about to start now. Clint carried Pete up the stairs, arms under his legs so he was perched on Clint's hip. Pete weighed far less than Lila, which was appalling, but the way his legs dangled around Clint's sides and the barely conscious hand he fisted in Clint's shirt gave him hope. That calm harbour after the tempest. Clint hefted his cargo in one arm and opened the spare bedroom door. It hadn't been touched since Nat last stayed there, other than to pack up a few of her things and replace the comforter he'd given to Pete that day with a duvet. Clint had never been able to walk in here for more than a few minutes, not with her perfume still lingering in the air. But tonight, it didn't bother him. He tugged back the duvet and a set of new yellow cotton sheets. He laid Pete down feet first, then walked his hands behind Pete's back until they were at his neck and his head was cushioned by the pillow. Pete let out a sustained sigh. Clint tucked the covers around his frame, making sure they were up to his chin. After that, he sat on the edge of the bed for a while, almost 15 minutes just petting through Pete's hair. He seemed to need it. Though limp and out of fight, a fluttery muscle in Pete's jaw told Clint he wasn't 100% with the program yet. He made a note to get the boys some water before he went to bed himself. I'm right across the hall if you need me. That did it. Pete's neck muscles bowed against the pillow, elastic once more. Night, Pete. Or good morning, I suppose I should say. When Clint stood, a hand shot out from under the duvet and latched onto his wrist. Clint, I... Pete's mouth worked and those long lashes blinked fast. Good night to you too. Clint smiled. Love you, Pete. Why a white leotard today? Natasha swirled the spoon across her knuckles. Because it's National Frozen Yogurt Day. There's a day for that? February 6th, but time kinda doesn't mean anything for me at this point. So why not celebrate today? Why not indeed? Instead of the black leotard and pink leg warmers, Nat wore a long-sleeved white number, complete with tights and red point shoes, like she was ready for a stage performance. They were the same red point shoes Coulson gave her as a Christmas gift years ago, NR monogrammed in gold at the heels. A short, flowy white skirt cradled the frozen yogurt tub in her lap. Her hair was back to shoulder length. Clint hopped up beside her on the counter, reading the tub label. White cranberry and walnuts. Always knew you were a brute for punishment. Rich, coming from the man who eats mayonnaise on a hot dog. I do that to human Nathaniel. Nat offered him the spoon. That was a first. You want to do the honours? Also for the first time, Clint got to look inside the tub when Nat opened the lid. Normally she was already eating when this happened. It just contained froyo, nothing more profound. But it was half-eaten, and streaks of chocolate marred the white patches. Nat rolled her eyes. That's from Tony using one spoon between two tubs. Talk about a brute. Hey! Clint whirled at the voice, and there was Tony, feet up on the kitchen table. Even more of a novelty. He worked on a book of chemical equations across his knees with a ballpoint pen. Hair dark, less grey than when Clint first met him. He still had those laugh lines around his eyes, though, and was still somehow the most vibrant point in any given room, even sans the arc reactor. Having a scoop of white chocolate and dark chocolate in one's mouth is the height of luxury, Romanova. Nat regarded him calmly, a touch exasperated too. Tony, this is my conversation. Come back later. Okay. Tony wiggled his bare toes, where his sweatpants pulled around his ankles. None of the fire or backbiting ensued that he normally fired at Nat, easygoing as a breeze. Bye, Clint. Don't break any more hearing aids. Clint waved like a moron when Tony disappeared. Literally disappeared. Clint stared at him the whole time, but still didn't see the moment Tony vanished. Nat pushed the spoon towards Clint again, so he dumbly took it and scooped out a bite. He flipped the spoon in his mouth, yogurt down on his tongue. This doesn't taste like anything. I'm eating air. Nat laughed. Told you, Tony. Tony didn't reappear, but the lights flickered over their heads. When they stopped, the room plunged back into its usual midnight darkness. Somehow, Clint still saw every detail perfectly. You happy? He asked, passing the spoon back to her. Very, or as well as I can be with Tony and Pietro breathing down my neck. You? I think so. Clint watched her savour a bite of something he couldn't eat yet. Haven't been since you died, but tonight I was. The feeling hasn't gone away. Clint tapped his chest. It's growing in there. Nat didn't ask what happened tonight. World-class spies never needed to ask, least of all her. But she studied him closely for a moment, in that roundabout way where she never stared him head-on. Clint examined his kitchen, a cleaner, sparser version of the way it usually looked. No clutter, though. The edges blurred in underwater shapes. Clint, do you know that scientists can't agree on how many spider species there are? Clint turned his head, and now she looked him head-on. No, I didn't. Not only that, but black widows hardly ever eat the males. Nat winked. Popular misconception. You used to hate that Red Room name and how you couldn't get rid of it once you defected. Nat stared from him to the froyo. Some spiders are solitary, but about 20 species live in packs. Family units. Didn't know that either. Clint? Nat hesitated. Clint about fell off the counter. Natasha never hesitated, for anything or anyone. Spiders get forgotten all the time. Clint gazed at her, the smooth skin free of scars and the bright red of her hair that hadn't dulled for lack of interest in eating, like those 5 years after Thanos. The eyes that seemed green in one light and wolf blue in another, now married together in a colour he'd never seen before, but one that was uniquely Natalia. A music box began to play in the background, faint like the pulse in his ears. The same tune Natasha danced to in her studio at the compound on days when she didn't like talking, always in her red point shoes. But not by you, Clint whispered. The lights flickered. Natasha handed him the spoon again, now fiery hot to the touch, her eyes urgent and imploring. Not by you either. Clint went from asleep to awake in 0.5 seconds. The music box melody morphed into humming, a woman's early morning husky humming, some Tchaikovsky ballet number they always listen to around Christmas. Clint sat up with a gasp, and it startled a chuckle out of Laura, getting dressed at the wall mirror. Her humming cut off. Hey, honey, you slept a long time today. Finally, right? Don't think I haven't noticed how well you've been sleeping these past 2 nights. What time is it? Clint panted, his eyes squinted against bright sunlight through the window curtains. Laura finished clipping in her bra and checked on her watch. Almost 9. Whoa! Clint! Clint started running the moment his feet hit the floor. He rounded the bed while Laura hurried to throw on a raglan shirt and follow him. Peter! Clint shook like a windsock. He headed for the guest room, and the bed was pristinely made, completely empty. Clint's knees went numb. Where's Peter? No, please, not again. What if he doesn't come back this time? Last night he said he wanted... Laura was taken aback, eyes wide. Pete's fine, Clint. He was right here, Lo. I tucked him in myself after I found him in the hallway closet. I need to see him. Clint didn't know why it was crucial right now, but it was. He needed to see him, really see him. Clint Barton, look at me. Laura tilted a finger under his chin, the universal sign to please shut up right now, this is important. Come downstairs. I have to find Peter. Pete. Clint shook his head to clear the cobwebs. We can't waste any more time, Laura. Laura softened. Yes, we can. Just a minute. Come on. Helpless, Clint was led down the stairs by the hand for a second time in 6 hours. Panic seized his chest of deeper air, and his head spun. The thought of Pete disappearing for good was so terrifying his mind crashed. Total blankout. Laura steered him into the combined kitchen and living room, over to the nearest couch. There, hun. See? Right next to a curly head, bowed in sleep. Clint wrapped an arm around Laura's shoulders, the only thing keeping him standing for a moment. He exhaled a few times in harsh succession, back of his hand to his mouth. He didn't leave, Moon Pie. Laura hugged Clint from the side. Found them like this when I got up. Them? Clint craned over the back of the couch, and another fluffy head appeared. It was Nathaniel, cuddled up in Pete's lap, half-eaten cheese biscuit in his little hand, trike between their chests. A tablet sat propped up on the coffee table and played Looney Tunes almost on mute, this episode about the Roadrunner. Both kids dead to the world. Clint smiled, heart a container of mushy peas at this point. I think Nathaniel woke up Pete to get him some breakfast. Laura smirked. I've already taken at least 12 photos of this, don't worry. We really are the fortunate ones, huh? Laura's surprise turned to joy, guarded as if to keep from scaring Clint. Yeah, we are. I'm pleased you're starting to see that. Living for the ones we lost, and the ones still here. Tears of happiness glittered in Laura's eyes. You're a wise man, Clint. Don't know about that. Good thing I know it for you. That sounds about right. Clint kissed her and threw a blanket over the kids. Crepes for breakfast? Oh, getting fancy, are we? Clint stole one last look at Pete's head resting on Nate, how Nate lifted a bit with each of Pete's breaths, like a compressed green ball. I'm in the mood to celebrate. Funny, so am I all of a sudden. Clint had just dug a mixing bowl and stirred the batter, Laura chopping mangoes and apples, when he counted his head. Laura, when's National Frozen Yogurt Day? That's a thing? Apparently. They have a day for everything now. Laura tapped at her phone screen. That would be February 6th. Clint smiled, knocking on the counter where Nat's point shoes had been. Lila and Cooper, predictably, piled down the stairs just before 10, woken by the alluring scents. The late night had hit them more than usual with the upcoming exam prep. They hardly gave the Pete-Nate bundle on the couch a second look.
Crepes?
Lila slathered hers in Nutella, topped off with fruit.
We never have crepes.
Clint kissed her forehead. Today we do. Sweet! Cooper didn't bother with a fork and a knife, just ate his fruit roll-up style, all fingers. The couch bundle stirred in a tangle of blankets and arms and footy pajama feet. Clint turned from flipping crepes on the stove. If he closed his eyes, the sound of cutlery on plates, sleepy footsteps, sizzling pan, and the murmuring conversation milled together in his life's greatest backing track.
Smells good.
Nate stumbled over after arranging trike on the coffee table in front of the screen so he could have cartoon time.
What's a crepe?
It's French, said Laura. A crepe is a thin, spongy bread, like a pancake. You roll it up.
I get to use my fingers?
Nate scaled the Everest of his usual cheer.
Awesome!
Pete stumbled over, but he bypassed the table and the counter for Clint. He retrieved a plate from the stack and held it out. Clint dished out a few crepes, spooning some fruit along the side. 2 crepes for the winner of the worst bedhead. Clint ruffled it for good measure. There, your reigning title is secure. Pete batted his hands, but a dopey smile gave him away. They shared a significant look, to which all Clint had to say about last night was a peck to the boy's blushing cheek. He dished up a few crepes for himself and sat at the head of the table by Cooper. Lila and Cooper were neck-deep in a discussion about whether Wesley could have beat Humperdinck in a sword fight, had he not been paralysed at the end of the movie and Humperdinck not a huge coward. Clint groaned at the gratuitous use of incorrect fencing terms, and Cooper's insistence that a Star Wars-esque backflip of something would have made it cooler. But it all died when Pete took a step closer to the table. His eyes went from the window, the porch swing Clint could just see around the curtain, to an empty chair by Nate. None of them said a word or cajoled, not even Nate, too preoccupied in folding his crepes. Just kept eating around surreptitious glances in the boy's direction. Laura snapped a photo of Cooper's deplorable table manners, the only woman in the world who was entertained by watching her kids do that sort of thing. Pete took another step closer, then another.
Wesley isn't as fast as Humperdinck,
said Lila suddenly. Maybe a little too loud about it to be casual, but insistent as a prosecution lawyer. Cooper jabbed his fork in her direction.
See, that's where you're wrong. Wesley has the skill and the range. That doesn't mean he's quick on his feet.
I think the fight with Inigo proved that fairly well. Pete kept his elbows tucked to his sides, but Clint had to blink to see it through a blur. Pete glared long and hard at the empty seat, like he might have to challenge it to a cage match for his food, then, ever so haltingly, sat down. In a chair. At the table. Chopping up his food with a fork and a knife and bumping elbows with Laura. She met Clint's eyes across the table with that joy exploding in silent fireworks. 2 months after Pete appeared in the woods, he found a place at their table and a cozy spot in their family dynamic. 7 years after his family disappeared, Clint Barton felt truly home.